So, a multiplayer horde shooter game has been taking the internet by storm recently, and even though I wanted to join the war effort to level up and take back the creek because holy shit, Space Vietnam needs all the bodies it can get, I can't because I honestly don't want to pay for two different subscriptions at once. So while I've been waiting for the game to come to Xbox, I dug through some of the games on my PS5 for something else to play, and eventually I found EDF 5. The EDF games are an experience, to the point that they have been considered the best, worst games ever through the pure cheesiness and insanity alone. And when it comes to the games, I genuinely think that EDF 5 is the best in the franchise, which is why I want to discuss it today. But before we even get to EDF 5, we have to do some background work and go over its predecessors, and this time, we are going way back. All the way back to 2003. The EDF games as a franchise started back in 2003 as a game called Monster Attack, which was made by Sandlot and published by D3 Publishers. From what information I could gather on the game, it wasn't really much, but as time went on, more and more games were added to the roster. GDF, also known as Global Defense Force, was released in 2005, and a year later, Global Defense Force Tactics was released, a spin-off turn-based strategy game made by ThinkArts along with EDF 2017, which pretty much cemented EDF's core gameplay loop, and a bunch of other things that I don't know or don't have the time to talk about. EDF would then go quiet for a couple of years before an American studio called Vicious Cycle got their hands on it in 2011 and managed to absolutely fuck up everything that made an EDF game an EDF game. The guns didn't feel good and all mostly acted and looked the same. They turned the Hectors, one of the best enemies in 2017 and beyond, into these big-ass gray blobs with hit spots on their chests that you can't hit because they're too damn fast or the gun is in the way. The cheesiness that made the games what they were completely removed or turned up to a degree that wasn't even funny anymore. The color palette was extremely muted, the story was somehow worse than the other games, and damn near every enemy had some dumbass ability or function that annoyed me and most of the player base to no end. But it doesn't mean that everything was bad. It actually introduced the Fencer in the form of the battle armor. That's right, the most broken motherfucker in this franchise came from a game that most of the fanbase see as a literal war crime. And I would be lying if I said that some of the Ravagers in this game don't look cool. The Mantis and Daddy Longlegs are some standout enemies that I wish would return in a future EDF game, but I will admit that the Mantis needs to be tweaked to hell and back. Anyways, back to the background work. In 2013, Sandlot got back into the game and released EDF 2025, a sequel to EDF 2017 that introduced a ton of new weapons, new classes, and new enemies. But 2 years later in 2015, EDF 4.1 was released to critical success. Simply put, 4.1 was just a better 2025, and it added a shit ton of new stuff like the Depth Crawler, Urginus and the Balams, the improved caves, some new enemies, and much, much more. And now we finally get to the subject of today's matter, EDF 5. Now, with the EDF games developed by Sandlot, they do this weird thing where they don't release everywhere all at once, but instead they release in Japan and then everywhere else a year or so later. So EDF 5 was released for us in December of 2018, when Japan had it back in 2017. EDF 5 is just a better EDF 4.1 in my opinion, and there is a lot of stuff to go over. So let's get started with the classes. In EDF 5, you get access to 4 different classes: the Ranger, Air Raider, Fencer, and Wing Diver. And since I mainly play Wing Diver, that's most of the footage you're going to be seeing. The Ranger is your basic infantry unit. They're able to hold 2 weapons, and they aren't really special compared to the likes of the other classes. But they are the easiest to grasp and don't have any major weaknesses like the other classes. Rangers have the ability to roll, but they can also sprint as well, which gives them this circle that picks up items like armor and weapons that gets bigger the more stuff you pick up. But they also have a plethora of weapons that any player could easily use, like assault rifles, shotguns, rocket launchers, homing missiles, sniper rifles, and much more. The only issues you really will have with them is 1, cave levels, which is a problem for all the classes no matter what way you look at it, and their speed. But all in all, they're a pretty good class. Next up on the list is the Air Raider, and holy shit, this may be the most fucked support unit I have ever seen in a video game. Air Raiders are quote-unquote support units that were meant to drop vehicles into battle either for themselves or for their teammates, but for some unholy reason, they also have access to airstrikes and orbital weapons. This turns this unit into an absolute tyrant because of how powerful these weapons are, and how many they can carry on them at once. Air Raiders are meant to have a vehicle drop, an airstrike, and a defense weapon, but since most Air Raiders like to hang back all the time, they would usually only take a vehicle, which are broken in their own right, and 2 airstrikes. This means air raiders are absolute monsters, but they do have some damn near debilitating weaknesses. The cave levels make air raiders almost completely useless, but they still have access to depth crawlers, which they can use to navigate the cave and fight giant insects with. They also have trouble defending themselves like other units because they only have access to limpet guns, which don't do as well as actual weapons. And when it comes to the vehicles, they don't have infinite ammo, so once the vehicle runs out of ammunition, it's pretty much useless. Next up is the Wing Diver, and these are one of my favorite units. Not just because they can fly and air dodge, but they also have all the cool experimental stuff. I do love myself some laser rifles and lightning rifles, but they also have lightning snipers. Let that sink in for a second. They have lightning sniper rifles, but they do have some weaknesses. Firstly, Wing Divers have the least health of all the units, so collecting red armor boxes is a priority so it doesn't bite you later. Secondly, the weapon's ammo is directly connected to their jetpacks, so if the jetpack overheats, you're a sitting duck until it cools down, so you need to keep an eye on it. The final class on the list is the Fencer. The Fencer is the heavy unit and has the most base health in the game, and can carry 4 weapons, which range from miniguns to spears to artillery cannons to shields to human-sized box cutters and nukes tied on sticks. These guys have 2 major weaknesses. Firstly, their speed. When it comes to speed, they have a boost ability, but without shield canceling, it doesn't really do much. Not to mention how extremely slow they are without the boost. And secondly, which is more of a nitpick, but holy hell, controlling these guys really sucks. It feels like I'm moving a turret, and this leads to me missing shots like crazy, to the point where it deterred me from playing the character for a while. But with that out the way, let's get on to the enemies you fight in the game. In EDF 5, there are multiple different types of enemies and variants you'll fight over the course of the game, so let's get to explaining. The most basic of these are gray ants, and they are fairly common and fairly weak, going down a couple of shots and spraying acid balls at you when you get too close, which is similar to the jumping spiders, who jump around instead of walking and shoot at webs. They do have silver and gold variants in Hardest and Inferno, but they are only seen in those difficulties. Red ants are a roided up version of gray ants, and instead of spraying acid at you, they run up and grab you with their mandibles and slam you against the ground until you die, which you can escape from by shooting them or getting a teammate to shoot at them. Green ants appear very late into the game and are fast as hell, like ridiculously fast. And the larger dark green ones are able to grab you like the red ants, but they are the weakest unit in the game to compensate. Next up are the flying drones, and the hornets who serve the same purpose. They are enemy air units that shoot at the player from above, one shooting lasers and the other shooting stingers, both of them having stronger and faster red variants. Next up are the frogs and alien infantry, which are some of the greatest enemies in the franchise. Instead of being a basic enemy that you shoot at, these guys dodge, roll, use building as cover, and to some ability, strategize. You can also blow off their limbs, and depending on what limb you shoot off, you'll either immobilize them, prevent them from shooting at you, or straight up kill them. But they can regrow the limbs after a short period of time. The alien infantry improve on this significantly by giving them armor, which not only makes them harder to fight, but makes it feel like more of a challenge because now you have to focus on a specific limb that you want to blow off. We then get to Erginus and Archelaus, which are probably the most tedious enemies in the game. Without a Balam, they are just a chore to fight because it takes far too long to fight them because I just bullet sponges without it. We then get to the anchors and dropships, which serve the same purpose. They spawn in insects, and the only way to destroy them is to shoot their weak points, the top of the anchor and the inside of the dropship, which you can shoot when they are dropping off enemies. Okay, Editor Neon here. So, while I was recording this video, my mic decided to break. I don't know what happened, so for the rest of the video, I'm gonna be sounding like this. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I'll just have to figure out how to fix it later. We then have boss insects in the form of queen ants, king spiders, and queen hornets, which are just bigger versions of their minions with an insane amount of health and stronger attacks. Banana spiders are large spiders that hang out on giant webs that shoot out threads that drag you towards them. And the only way you can get the spider to let go is to shoot it. You can also get stuck on the web if you fly or jump into it, and the only way to escape it is to destroy the web, so I suggest to keep a distance when you're dealing with these guys. And finally, you have tadpoles, who fly around and shoot fire at you, and some of the bigger versions will swoop down and grab you like the red ants, so once again, be very careful with these guys. All in all, the enemies in the game are pretty good, with only a couple of players that aren't 100% there. Now, the last thing I have the time to go over is the levels of EDF 5, which to me are some of the best levels in the franchise. There are about 110 levels in EDF 5, and most of these levels are the same thing. Kill the enemies, collect armor and weapons while the next wave spawns, kill those enemies, collect their items, and the level, rinse and repeat, which was pretty similar to how most of the levels would play out in previous EDF games. But what makes 5 special is because of how the levels stand out. In some missions, there's either fog or a dust storm raging, which lowers your visibility, which makes it more tense than usual because not only do you have your guard up because giant insects can pounce from the fog at any moment, but you have to rely on the minimap to figure out where the enemies are and how to navigate. There's also stealth missions in this game, but they're technically not stealth missions, it's kinda hard to explain. In these missions, it gives you a group of soldiers or you're on your own, and you have to take out a group of enemies. And you can either take the stealthier option and take out the smaller groups one by one, or you can rush through all of them. Even though these missions rarely happen, they are still pretty fun to play. There's also multiple different locations you can play in. Sometimes you're on a beach fighting off hordes of insects, sometimes you're fighting against armies of monsters in empty plains with hundreds of other EDF soldiers and vehicles, or sometimes you're searching an underground cave for the queen of the giant insects. One of the standout missions in EDF 5 is a mission where you have to defend this building with a team of snipers from giant frogs, and as the level goes on, more giant frogs show up on top of buildings and begin to shoot at you. So you and the frogs get into a sniper duel along with the other snipers as you try to manage incoming giant insects on top of all of that, which, even though it sounds pretty chaotic, is very fun to play. I actually go back to this mission and play it more than once. Even though there's a ton more stuff that I want to go over, like the music and the story, I'm gonna have to cut it here because I've been procrastinating on this video for far too long. In conclusion, EDF 5 is definitely worth the playthrough, and I suggest getting this before playing EDF 6, because by the time this video comes out, the game would have been out here for over a week. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow as a channel, and I will see you guys next time.